You may have already actually seen them over the last couple of days, but we're going to go through a few examples of each migration type. And the first, appropriately enough, is the austral migration. Now, for most of us that probably live in the northern hemisphere, either northern Europe or Canada, North America, this is completely the opposite way round to our migration, our boreal migration, which I will come to in just a tick. So, in effect, during the austral winter, birds move north during June and August, and then during the austral summer, right now, which is why we're here, they will move south during December to February. Then we have altitudinal migration, and that's where birds will live at very, very high altitudes, and some mammals as well, and some insects, butterflies. They'll live at very, very high altitudes during the summer, and then when the winter weather closes in, again, it's not necessarily the weather, it's the fact that the weather closes down that food availability. Those altitudinal migrants will drop down to coastal level in order to find food. And then we have neotropical migration, and that's where birds move from the neotropics, which are generally defined of regions around Mexico, Central South America, that lies just south of the Tropic of Cancer. It's a bit of a variable area, that part of the world, and it is always up for discussion. And then the last one is boreal migration, and for me that's the most exciting. This occurs in the northern hemisphere, but it has very, very, very big impacts on what goes on down here in the southern hemisphere. And migration, of course, is south during the boreal winter, which is right now, and then north during the boreal summer, which is June to August. And of course, austral, for those who like their Latin, is basically a derivative of the word south or south winds. And indeed, if there's any Argentinians in the audience that want to correct me, I believe the peso at one point was actually called the austral, between about 1985, 91, something like that. The peso was actually called the austral. So, a couple of maps here. A couple of maps, just to put into perspective some of the extraordinary distances birds. So this is the North American flyway here, northern Canada, Alaska, Arctic tundra, and many birds will come right over the Atlantic. It's all to do with, in part, what we call the Coriolis effect. If any of us have flown to, let's say, Europe from the States, as I'm sure we all know, we don't just zip straight across the Atlantic here. We generally go up towards Greenland and then come back down again. And that is in part due to the rotation of the planet and also something called the Coriolis effect. And birds have figured this out also. And when they're migrating from the North America, they will come right out over the mid-Atlantic and then come back in here into northern South America. We have the Siberian East Pacific flyway down here into Australia and New Zealand, and later on in this presentation, ladies and gentlemen, there are some pretty stunning statistics coming up. And then we have the Western European and African flyway here. So some quite extraordinary distances involved. And here we are, Princess Sapphire, just down here somewhere. Going across the Drake Passage. Not too rough so far? Everybody happy?
Yeah.
Good, good. So, slightly different perspective. Any Kiwis in the room? Any Kiwis in the audience? Yes. There we go. So, you can just see how close New Zealand is here to the Antarctic, Australia. Here we are again, South America and South Africa here. And this is important because the bird that comes from North America, Alaska, Canada, that winters down here in New Zealand, and again it's a story I'll come to in just a moment. So, austral migration. A couple of bird species that we may have seen on our walk yesterday. Did anybody see this? Yeah, one or two. This is called an Austral Logrito. Very, very pretty bird. It's a flycatcher. This is a male. They come down to Tierra del Fuego in the austral summer where they'll breed. They mate, breed very, very quickly, and the male disappears very, very soon after mating. Not quite as bright, but still, nonetheless, quite charismatic. It's one of the tyrant flycatchers. It's a big group of birds down here in South America. And this is a female Austral Logrito. It still has the chestnut on the back. Very pretty bird, quite common. And again, it is a selection of, you know, I could stand here all day, but we don't have the time. But it is a small selection of birds that you hopefully will see on your travels. It's not going to be too map heavy, ladies and gentlemen, but just to give you an indication, the orange is where these guys breed, and then the blue is where they move to in the winter. So when we are up back home in the Northern Hemisphere, this will be their winter, the blue area in June and July. Very pretty bird. This is a rufous-chested dotterel or a rufous-chested plover, whichever you choose. And again, it breeds in southern Chile, Argentina, and the Falkland Islands. When we get to the Falkland Islands, you should see these with abundance. And another bird called a two-banded plover. Has anybody seen any of these already? Yes, lady there. This week? No, before? Okay. And as always, the exception that proves the rule. I'm talking about birds moving in order for food. There are always populations that choose to stay put. And that is because, frankly, food is available. So here we have, here's the summering population here of rufous-chested dotterel, and then these guys move north into northern Argentina and Uruguay and up into northern Chile. But the Falkland Island population here, that remains a resident. And again, it will all be down to food availability. Two-banded plover, very small shorebird. Big flocks in the winter, up to 200 birds. Quite an attractive bird. Again, very easy to identify with that two bands going across the chest. If we're on Falkland and we're walking along the beaches, the Falkland Island actually subspecies is slightly different. It kind of has 1.5 bands. Kind of lost half a band somewhere along the way. And we can see the Tierra del Fuego population, the whole of that population moves up into Chile and northern Argentina and even up into Uruguay a little bit there. But again, the Falkland Island population remains resident. So this bird, we will see lots and lots of them. They are tiny, they're very difficult to see, but if you spend enough time on Promenade Deck 7 in a couple of days' time, you will see lots and lots of these. This is the smallest warm-blooded animal to breed in Antarctica. There are about 8 to 20 million birds, and on average they weigh about only 40 grams. It is a tiny, tiny bird. It is, of course, a Wilson's petrel, and our friend the Wilson's petrel was discovered by Scottish-American ornithologist Alexander Wilson many, many moons ago. Very small indeed, and we will see lots of these. Now, this bird in the austral winter moves north through the South Atlantic. It moves across the equator. It goes up past Portugal, past Spain, past France, and many, many birds. It's been found to winter, the austral winter that is, off the coast of Western Europe, including the UK and off points around Carolina and Florida. So this tiny, tiny little bird makes that journey all the way, feeding on zooplankton as it goes. So that's a few examples of austral migration, south to north. And the next we're going to look at is altitudinal migration. And this guy's a beauty.
Ooh.
That's something here. Have we all seen one of these in the last week? This is a condor. This is an Andean condor. The biggest bird of prey on the planet.
Ooh,
okay, not the biggest bird on the planet. That is the wandering albatross, which we'll come to later on in the week. I have a presentation called Life on the Ocean Wave, and it covers all aspects of the seabirds that we're going to see, the penguins, the albatrosses, the petrels, how you identify them, and a little bit about the physiological adaptations that allow them to survive. But this is a Andean condor. The males have this huge white ruff, rather grand there, and the yellow, they have this thing on the top, what we might call the comb, is called a caruncle. The caruncle. And the male has a yellow eye, and a female has a red eye. That's how we tell the difference. Never a fan of a bird with red eyes. It always makes me worry. So, Andean condor. They have actually quite an interesting symbiotic relationship with turkey vultures. Anybody that doesn't live in the Americas may not be familiar with turkey vultures, because we don't get them in Europe and Asia, but they have a very, very poor olfactory sense. They have a very poor sense of smell. On the other hand, turkey vultures have a very, very good sense of smell. And there are a lot bigger Andean condors than turkey vultures. And what will often happen is a turkey vulture will arrive at a carcass that they've smelt from many kilometers away. But when they arrive, they just don't have the bulk and they just don't have the strength in order to rip that carcass open. Their friend, the Andean condor, comes in, rips it open for them, and they both get something from that relationship. So yeah, so Andean condor, very, very poor sense of smell, but it's like a big set of cutters. The turkey vulture, very, very good sense of smell, but it relies on the Andean condor to open up the carcass for them. A little bit of symbiosis. Very, very important, actually, Andean condor in Inca trilogy, along with the snake and the puma, and they can live for around about 60 to 70 years. So they're quite long-lived birds, our friend the condor. So another small bird that we're going to come across, particularly on the Falklands, is this. It's not particularly bright, but it's very, very charismatic. It runs around like a little robin. It's called a dark-faced tyrant, and it is another altitudinal migrant. It breeds very, very high up, about 1,500 meters up in the Chilean and Argentine Andes. And then when winter comes, this guy drops down and down and down and down, and eventually it reaches the coast and will spend winter in people's backyards and gardens. And again, it's one of the tyrant flycatchers. And they will actually go north as well. Some birds can be both altitudinal and austral migrants. They can do both. They can come down and they can go north, and it is very much dictated on food supply, which will be determined by the weather. This little guy is called the grey-flanked synclodis. Similarly, not chosen for its colour particularly, but because it is one that we are highly likely to see just wandering around town, really, to be honest. Looks a bit like a thrush. And the next family photograph. This is a white bellied seed snipe. And this lives at very, very, very high altitudes, around about 3 to 4,000 meters, which in old money is about 10,000 feet. So it's about, they live about 10 to 14,000 feet high. And as you can imagine, in the winter when the snows arrive, it very, very quickly gets covered in snow. These guys eat seeds and lichens, scratch around on the ground. If they're unable to do so because of the depth of the snow, that's their food supply immediately cut off. That forces them to lower elevations where they can then find food. So that's altitudinal migration. Briefly, neotropical migration. There aren't too many examples actually of neotropical migration. This is the best one. Again, very, very common. This is a white-crested Elania. It is one of the tyrant flycatchers again, and it lives in the south and western parts of South America, and indeed the entire population, Tierra del Fuego population, and the whole of the Chilean population actually of white-crested Elania all migrate into Brazil. Brazil and northern Argentina, the whole population makes that move, again for food. Here we go. So here's that. This is the orange here, and we can see the Chilean population on the Tierra del Fuego. They all move into northern Argentina, Paraguay, Uruguay, and Brazil. The whole population makes that shift. Clearly, there's something down here that makes it worth their while making this migration all the way south during the austral summer. This is a bird many Floridians may be familiar with. This is a black skimmer. Again, this moves down here in the austral summer and from the near tropics. This has a very distinctive way of fishing. It flies along with its lower mandible, lower part of the beak, just under the water as it flies along, skimming along, and the second it tenses a fish under the water, it very, very quickly snaps shut to feed. So there are two examples of neotropical migrants. Of course, it's not just birds, ladies and gentlemen. I know we've all been to a couple of lectures this week about humpback whales. Make huge migrations. There's lots of different populations around the Antarctic. Some will go up to Antarctica, some will go up to Australia, some will go up to the Indian Ocean. The population around the Antarctic Peninsula will go north towards Peru and Colombia and Costa Rica, and those kind of regions. And it's a heck of a journey, 5,000 miles one way, where they will mate and they will calve. They will come back the following year to feed, come back to Antarctica that is, to feed, and then they will return again the following year to wean the previous year's calf and to then become active and remate. We also have something which I touched on in a lecture a couple of days ago. It's called diel migration. And diel migration is the upward and downward vertical movement of fish and plankton within the water body. Okay, so we have something called the photic zone, and the photic zone is there obviously during the day. The phytoplankton will come towards the surface in order to photosynthesize. The zooplankton will follow the phytoplankton towards the surface. The fish and the larger predators will follow the zooplankton, and so it goes on and goes on and goes on. When it gets dark, the phytoplankton can no longer photosynthesize. There is no sun for it to be able to do that. So those phytoplankton then sink down into the water column and go lower and lower and lower. The zooplankton think, well, there's no point in me hanging around. I might as well go lower and lower. And it's a daily migration up and down. That's called diel migration. It's not something that's actually discussed very often. So the next and final type of migration, and probably one of the most exciting and the most dramatic, is boreal migration. Boreal being relating to the northern hemisphere. A few species coming up and a few examples. This is a pair of white-rumped sandpipers. Now, white-rumped sandpipers breed right across the Arctic tundra. They're not circumpolar, they're restricted to Alaska and Arctic Canada. These are very, very, very long distance migrants. For those who don't believe me when I tell you this is a white-rumped sandpiper, this is its rump. This is not its rump, this is its tail. Okay, so this here is its rump, and as we can see, it clearly has a white rump, which gives its name. Now, the sharp-eyed amongst you will notice that the other bird doesn't have a white rump, and that is because that is a semi-palmated sandpiper. These are both American species of birds. Both of them make quite long distance migrations. Now, get my clicker working. As we can see, here we go, in orange. This is the Greenland here, Alaska. This is the breeding area of white-rumped sandpiper. This yellow here, for those at the back of the room, is the migration route. They do not spend the winter here. Right down here in the blue is where the population of white-rumped sandpipers spend their winter, all the way from Canada, Alaska, that massive migration all the way down here to the southern part of South America. Quite an extraordinary journey, ladies and gentlemen. And all the perils that go with it. We've got weather, we've got exhaustion, we've got predation. You know, how these birds actually make it back for the following season is really quite extraordinary. And obviously it comes down to genetics, and generally the strongest and the luckiest sometimes get through. This is another North American bird, a Hudsonian godwit. Makes the long journey down here to southern South America. When they get here, they don't actually look like this, to be fair. This is an adult male in breeding plumage. So this is where what you might see up in Alaska or Canada. But when they're down here, we would call it winter plumage. I think in America you call it alternate plumage. But this is generally what they look like. And godwits are truly a fascinating group of birds. The next bird is also a godwit. It is a bar-tailed godwit. Specifically, it is 234,684. So what does that mean? Well, some German researchers put on a geolocator. If anybody's familiar with a geolocator, it's a small chip. It's put on the back of a bird, and it records an awful lot of information on where the bird goes, how long it takes to get from A to B to C to D, and it gives us a lot of feedback, and some of it's quite extraordinary. Now, a decade or so ago, our bar-tailed godwit set off from Alaska heading towards New Zealand, as they do, and everybody assumed that on the way they take a little break, they have a sit around, maybe a little bit of a chill, bit of a pina colada. But as it turns out, that simply wasn't true. These guys set off from Alaska. This particular bird, actually, it took a bit of a wrong turn and it ended up in Tasmania, in Australia, and it covered 8,435 miles in that journey. Now, that's pretty impressive, but what's more impressive is it did it in one go. Yeah, it took just 11 days for that bird to fly 8,500. That's a third of the circumference of the planet. And it did it in just 11 days without stopping. Now, how did it do it? Well, simply, the answer is fat. And fat is super, super important in terms of migration. And this bird, bar-tailed godwit, is able to basically, the best way for me to describe it is it actually eats itself, okay? It eats its internal organs. So it thinks, you know what? I'm not eating for 11 days. I don't need an esophagus. I'm not drinking for 11 days. I don't really need my kidneys. So it dissolves part of its organs and it makes a lot more room for a lot more fat. And it's that fat that enables it to make some of these most extraordinary migrations. It's very, very rich in energy. And that bar-tailed godwit, 234684, did Alaska to Tasmania in 11 days without stopping. Quite extraordinary. Now, I should add, and I sometimes forget this, when they get to their end journey, they do regenerate those cells. Okay, so they're not left without kidneys or an esophagus. They are able to regenerate. So that's quite an incredible bird, and it comes all the way down. And again, you know, this isn't a land bird. If this hits weather, if this ends up in the water, it really is in the soup. And there's that map of our friend bar-tailed godwit. Extraordinary journey. There's Antarctica just underneath it. So this bird, an Arctic tern. I took this in Scotland, in Shetland, and you might think, well, hold on, why are we talking about, you know, Scottish birds when we're down here in the Antarctic? And the simple reason is that this bird spends its summer in the Arctic and it spends the boreal winter down here in the Antarctic. This bird never sees a winter. It is in perpetual summertime. And that journey is around about 22,000 miles a year. And sometimes when they get down here into Antarctica, they will circumnavigate the continent. And by the time they've done that, it's time to head back to Scotland or Alaska. They are, Arctic terns are circumpolar, Siberia, Alaska, Canada, Europe, but they do spend their winters down here in the Antarctic. Bird never ever sees a winter. They're fairly long-lived, generally about 15 to 30 years, but there's been some ringing recovery. We call it ringing in the UK. I know you guys call it banding. And there was a bird that was recovered with a band on its leg, and it was 34 years old. So this guy, this Arctic tern, was 34 years of age. Now, ladies and gentlemen, my maths isn't the best. So before I came out this morning, I got my calculator out, and we've established that they fly around 22,000 miles a year. So 22,000 times 34 years, and that's an incredible 748,000 miles in this bird's lifetime. So just to put that into context, it's only 230,000 to the moon. Yeah. So this bird in its lifetime has done about 2.5 times the journey to the moon. So that's the Arctic tern, ladies and gentlemen. It's all about migration. And again, they don't do it for fun. They don't do it because they want to. They do it because they have to. It's all about food. 2.5 times the distance to the moon. So, nearly there, ladies and gentlemen. I do want to make mention, hummingbirds, we do not get in Europe. In fact, you do not get them outside of the Americas. And I always thought that hummingbirds were to be found in hot, sweaty, sticky places like the Caribbean and Florida and California. It turns out not. This is a white-sided hill star. It is an altitudinal migrant, goes up and down. It's also austral. And very quickly, very brief story before I shoot off. Many years ago, with my then wife, hey, have you been to any of the souvenir shops yet? Have we found them? You will. You'll find them on Falkland. And the kind of shops that not only take your money, but they take a little bit of your soul as well. And you'll find them on Falkland. And my then wife and I were in one of these shops in, just outside Santiago, somewhere up in the Andes. She wanted to go in. I wanted to stand outside. And of course, naturally, Paul started talking to the lady at the shop and she said, are you here on your own? She went, no, my husband's outside. He's an ornithologist, he's boring. I mean, he's bored. I hope that's what she said anyway. Maybe she did say bored. He's outside, he's bored. So the lady in the shop said, well, if he goes 1 block to the left, 2 blocks to the right, straight on, he will find a huge lavender bush, and there he will find hummingbirds. Well, to me, this was extraordinary. We were so high up in the Andes, it was so fairly cold, to be honest with you, but nonetheless, Paula popped her head out the door and she said, the lady's just said, 2 blocks down, 1 block down, I'm going to stay here and buy one of everything. It seemed like a good deal at the time. So off I shot. So I took the route, got to this huge lavender bush, sat there for 10 minutes. I only had an hour curfew. Sat there for 15 minutes, sat there for 30 minutes, and sure enough, the lady was quite right. This beautiful hummingbird called a white-sided hill star suddenly appeared in front of me. So, you know, this is again another extraordinary bird that lives at altitude and leaves Chile and for the austral winter and is very much a jewel. Now, ladies and gentlemen, what I will tell you, I hot-footed it back to the shop. I was so excited. I threw open the door. Paula and the lady were still standing there. I was so excited. We ended up buying 2 of everything that we didn't actually need. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks very much for listening. We'll see you again soon.